Let's talk about our two friends next to me here. On my immediate right is Mr. Jonathan Am, who is co-founder of Change Agents. Jonathan, as you will hear from his accent, a bit like Connell, isn't from Cork. He's also trying to figure out where he might be going, and he often looks for the Middleton bus. But Jonathan moved to Ireland from South Africa about, is it 5 years ago now? Five years ago, yeah. And Jonathan has an interesting history working both in the corporate world and having his own businesses in the area of branding and marketing and so on. And we'll just get into asking Jonathan a little bit about what he does in a minute. And next to Jonathan is John Prendergast, who again, another person who made a significant migration move a number of years ago. In that he decided to quit the rat race that is the metropolis of Cork and moved west to set up an internet strategy business based in Kenmare, County Kerry. Even though he lives in Glengarriff, I feel a bit like Avril now. I'm giving away all your secrets, and the keys are under the mat. So, and he's here, right? So you could, if you leave now. Yeah, exactly. And John's company is Enoch, and a very successful internet strategy company. So, ladies and gents, please welcome Jonathan and John. So for the next 40 minutes or so, we're just going to get into a number of, let's say, interesting questions, some challenging questions that face most of us in business. And what I'd actually like you to do is, as you're listening to the conversation, maybe just to think about some questions that you might have for the two lads. And what I might ask you to do is just hold on to them. And then we'll have 10 minutes or so when we finish the conversation to get into some broader discussion, okay? So, how I'd like to kick it off, and John Prendergast, if you don't mind, I'll come to you first. Just tell us a little bit about the nature of the work that you do.
Well, we're internet strategy consultants, and normally when we use that as an introductory statement, people go, "You what?" Yeah. So essentially, we work with companies to establish where the opportunity is for them online. If there is an opportunity for them online, we help them quantify it, and we help them build a strategy to execute. And I suppose these days that tends to be a huge broad spectrum of companies, because the internet is pretty pervasive, and most companies have decided that they do need some form of internet channel management. So it's fairly wide. This iteration of my professional career, I suppose, was prompted by a sojourn in an internet travel company. So prior to that, I was doing mostly B2B online software, and I started working in online travel, and it was a real road to Damascus moment for me as I fell from my horse and realized, holy, I've got to curb my colourful language for the camera apparently. There's massive opportunity, even in remote areas, to service global requirement around, in this case, travel, and have hundreds of millions of dollars flow through a company that's booking hotel rooms globally for a global audience. And it was a real wow moment of someone who was deep in technology, deep in the internet, kind of realize, oh, actually, it's all about the consumer interaction and how that then feeds up. So that was how we ended up where we are now, in terms of realizing that there was an opportunity to help businesses to understand and to execute in terms of selling online. That's primarily what we do.
Brilliant. And Jonathan, if we can ask you the same question, what kind of stuff do you guys do?
Change Agents?
Yeah.
Change Agents is basically a branding and design company. So what we do is we go in and we help clients to basically revitalise and refresh their brands. So we kind of work across different disciplines. We work across marketing, branding, innovation. We work with clients to really try and fine-tune what their strategy is, what their competitive advantage is, and ultimately to help them grow more customers at the end of the day. So yeah, we're Cork-based, but we work with collaborators in Cork, in Ireland, and in other parts of the world, including South Africa, where I'm from. And we have a lot of fun. The business is totally web-based. It's got a very flat structure. And typically we try and bring in the most talented people in the different areas that we're working in. And similar to John, we also explore brands on the internet, but also, particularly in the Munster market, focus on doing it within environments like restaurants, nightclubs, that type of stuff. And then also out there in the marketplace in terms of advertising communication.
Sure, great. So it sounds from the way both of you introduced yourselves that in essence you're helping businesses to connect with existing and prospective customers. I mean, essentially, does it boil down to that, or am I being too simplistic?
Yep.
And you have to figure out which one you mean.
You don't want to price it up.
Well, you were definitely out. So,
well, I think it's about getting more customers to notice you.
Yeah.
First of all, so how do you stand out in terms of attention and awareness? But once they've noticed you, how do you get them to come closer to you, and how do you get them to tell more people about you? So in that area, you're looking at things like loyalty, affinity, and positive word of mouth communication. So I think in our space, it's about how to use the crossover of all the different tools, whether it be online, creativity, innovation, storytelling, all of these different aspects, and bring them together in a way that's going to really ramp up the greatest number of customers for clients.
Sure. So, if you don't mind, Jonathan, just tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you've got going on or have completed in the last, let's say, year or so. What kind of things have you been able to achieve with clients?
Well, I mean, when I first came to Cork, I arrived in the Cork airport hotel, didn't know anyone in Cork, so as you're talking about changing geography and getting to know how to get from A to B was quite an experience. But certainly just in terms of meeting people and starting with conversations, and I guess all branding starts with a conversation. We started to meet people and talk about how we could improve their marketing. So really, I mean, we've done a spectrum of different types of projects. We worked with Electric, which is the restaurants and nightclub or bar in Cork City Centre, and that was a great project, working with 3 very dynamic and passionate entrepreneurs, helping them to really frame what type of proposition they were going to have in the Cork market. So it's really cool when you're starting with a blank sheet, literally, and you've got guys that have got the confidence in you and are willing to work collaboratively with you to try and carve out what this new offering is going to be, how it's going to look, how that's going to play across the buildings, the website, how do they get more customers in. So I guess that's probably one of the key projects that we've done. We've also done projects with Ireland's biggest online dating site, a website called Another Friend, which was also very interesting because that was a project of taking brand into the online space and really trying to understand how do you engage with customers online, how do you make that user experience more fun, more engaging, almost bringing gaming applications into the online space. And then we've developed products. We've developed a skincare range, which started 2 years ago. It's a product called Human and Kind. And once again, entrepreneurs would have approached us with a tube, a very good product, but with no idea of how to brand it. So we would have worked with them to kind of prototype what the product was going to be, analyze the different competitive markets, and really help them construct and create a brand out of nothing. And it's a great success story today. They're in about 10 countries globally, and they're starting to export and roll out distribution. So it shows you there's, although we're in tough economic times, there are opportunities and there are entrepreneurs willing to take risks and embrace branding and new types of creative thinking.
So you've described there a number of different engagements and, in the, let's say, services and online and products and so on. But if I was to ask you, which elements of all that work were most enjoyable for you? Which things would spring to mind?
I think for me the greatest kick personally is to be able to start with a blank slate, where there's total uncertainty and anxiety around what it's going to be, and
Yeah.
really helping those teams to really map out and visualize, what the business is going to be in the future, and then really working with them to try and bring that to life. I mean, I get a huge reward, just walking past Electric, and if we think back 3 years, that side of town was quite desolate almost on the end there. I mean, people were squatting in that park, and now it's totally revitalized. We just added a new fish bar, which we worked with them to design on the other side. So there's going to be a new fish bar offering that's going to be right on the River Lee. So yeah, that's very rewarding for me, Adam.
Sure.
Really enjoy it.
Great. And John, if I could ask you the same question, when you look at the work you've done the last couple of years, what things have you enjoyed the most?
I think it's a mix because, excuse me, we've really struggled to get away from travel, but it's very difficult when you've got very deep sectoral knowledge to completely break the chains. And in the past year, I found myself doing something that I didn't fully expect or anticipate or desire, which was to begin commuting again. So I'm currently doing 3 days every second week with a client in the UK, and they're a tour operator. And that's a really interesting business because it is different to online travel agency, which is kind of where we built our core skill set. And with online travel agency, you don't care what you sell, because if I don't sell vendors A's bed bank, I'll sell vendor B's or vendor C's or vendor D or vendor Z. So you've no loyalty to the product you're selling. So that's why I suppose platforms like Expedia, Bookings.com, they can be completely TripAdvisor agnostic. They don't care. They don't care anything about the product because it's a commodity. Whereas in the tour operator world, you own the product. It's much more like fast-moving consumer goods because it's perishable stock. When that bed is empty and gone, it's gone. It's never coming back. So there's a whole different dynamic around it. And I suppose for us, this was a very interesting opportunity to move into a new space around a slight tweak on something that we know an awful lot about, the technology of travel, and move into an area where you're profiling pricing. And you're looking at demand versus seasonality, and it's fascinating because I suppose the psychology of it is so different to how Irish consumers buy travel. The early booking market for me was a real eye-opener, I suppose, because I'm a real, what are we doing next weekend? Oh yeah, Jesus, I forgot to book that holiday. Where do we go? Whereas you find people in the UK market booking 14 months in advance because they know the product they want to get the exact ski chalet they're looking for with the exact room that they're looking for that has that jacuzzi and that view of that mountain. And to me, that was a real kind of something I couldn't have predicted from my own personal experience. Like, that's pretty anal. Wow.
Yeah.
So that's been, I suppose, a really interesting engagement for me personally, in that every client or project that you work on brings some new facet and some new dimension to something.
Yeah.
And to me, the dimension that this brought was scale, phenomenal scale, and also the difference in that the stock is perishable, and so you can't just sit back and go, well, I'll sell something else. It's like, no, you actually, within the 8-week window, people start to get very, very nervous, and trading meetings tend to get hot, heavy, and fraught.
Sounds good. How do we get a bit of that action? So, what's interesting to me, having heard you guys describe the work that you're doing, in general conversation, and I'd say predominantly in media channels, we get the sense that we live in a changed world, and the kind of the common narrative in this country seems to be boom time and then recession. But I'm curious, what have you guys seen in terms of how the marketplace has changed? How people's behaviours have changed, and if there are broader changes out there than just boom and bust, let's say. What have you seen from that point of view?
But I think, I share office space with our other client, Human and Kind, and they obviously are exporting their products to about 7 different countries now. And it's always fascinating. Every trip they go on, they're part of Enterprise Ireland's high potential startup. So they regularly go on different trips. And just I think the growth that's happening outside of Ireland and the positivity in other markets, including Sweden, Holland, South Africa, is quite gobsmacking almost. I mean, recently I've come back from South Africa, and just the scale of growth there was quite phenomenal. So I think in an Irish context, I think we're suffering from hyper austerity almost. I mean, I think we've taken so many knocks, and there's so much negativity in terms of what we hear that it's almost quite challenging for entrepreneurs and business people to keep the faith, to keep the momentum going. So yeah, I mean, I think it all depends. I think Ireland's very fascinating because it's so sectorally based. I think if you're a company that produces locally but exports globally, you're in a total different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
If you go up to Dublin to any of the web conferences and the web stuff that's happening in Dublin, it's like being in Silicon Valley. I mean, there's an energy and an enthusiasm that's contagious. So I think that's quite fascinating. You'd probably share more on that.
Yeah, I suppose the online sector that we're in is incredibly resilient, and we haven't, thankfully, experienced any sense of the downturn. Quite the opposite, in fact. We're becoming more picky and choosy about who we work with, which is great. And I suppose what I have found is that since 2008, businesses who want to trade online, as Jonathan says, are far more focused about opportunities in external markets. And so one of the obvious ways of reaching external markets is to trade online, and so there's a great appetite for that and an enthusiasm for it at the moment. And I suppose, the really obvious thing is that right next door to us there's 70 million people who are the most advanced e-commerce market in the world per capita. So there's a massive opportunity. They speak English, they're right next door to us.
They are English in many senses.
They are, exactly.
Yeah.
They are completely accessible to us, and there are some, depending on what you're selling, there are obviously some logistical challenges. For us, the ideal product is an e-ticket where there's no logistics, but there are ways of cracking the export issue, even when you're dealing with small startup phase logistics. I suppose a lot of very innovative products have come into the marketplace in terms of bundling up products, shipping them, and then breaking it out on the other side. So yeah, people are very interested in export-led internet strategies at the moment. So that's the biggest difference. And I think the other difference is the velocity of business is changing. I think the complacency within the Irish market that we had up to 2007 was, everything was going to be the same. It was just a continuing cycle of growth, and the fact that there was an upset in 2008 made people think, oh, we actually need to be more dynamic and more nimble about what we do. And I think that velocity of change is definitely coming home in terms of how people choose to spend their money in targeting online opportunities.
Yeah. A lot of people try to sell us this concept of the secret or the magic bullet, or buy this and you'll get that.
Funny you should say that.
Read
I have one here.
Yeah. But I guess if I could ask you a kind of a related question, but obviously, knowing that it's a nonsensical premise, but by actually asking you, what do you see to be working, just from a kind of an emerging trends point of view, or, what are the things that are tending now to be working for companies who are trying to connect with new markets and so on? What are they? I'm sure there's 101 different things we could talk about, but what kind of things spring to mind from what you see in your work?
Well, I think as John was saying, I think that the web is giving small companies and high potential startups maximum velocity in a way that it was incapable of doing previously. So I think for smaller companies, who want to ramp up and get traction and scale, I mean, I think the web certainly is an amazing platform to achieve that. I think also if you look at the funding, for web-related projects in Ireland that are export-based, it's quite extensive. So in a way, I mean, if you're starting any kind of company, I think these days that's what you need to be thinking of. Because that's where the market is. So, even funny enough with the Human and Kind guys who are Dutch, but of a product that's totally Irish, even when that product travels to Dubai and the Middle East and they're in a couple of countries there, people are still curious about the Irish story. So you find these two Dutch guys trying to tell the Irish story because people are like, wow, this is an Irish product. So I mean, once again, I think it shows that Irishness intrinsically in brands travels well, and certainly very successful brands like Guinness and Bailey's. And even when I was in South Africa, everywhere I went, I saw Jameson. It's quite weird because in Cork I don't see Jameson that often, but in Johannesburg it's all over the place. So, I think trying to capture that story and get that story leveraged and exported using the web, I think is a very, very powerful tool for startup businesses.
I think there is another fascinating aspect of it for me personally, when you're going out in a sales mode, is I had never really thought about this, but of course the fact that you've got global businesses like Trend Micro, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, Google, Microsoft, all located in Ireland, means that people in the UK kind of think, wow, you guys really know what you're doing over there. Of course we do! We do! Damn it!
You're right.
But it's a really interesting dynamic because they actually do think, oh wow, it's a center, it's a hub of amazing high-tech businesses. You've got to have your finger on the pulse over there. So if you're selling technology and you're selling technology consultancy, it's fantastic. It's a brilliant leg up because just in the way that there's I suppose a notional heritage story around Irish brands like Guinness, Bailey's, etc. There's also another flip side, which is by, I suppose, nefarious tax structures that we have constructed in this country, we have created a hub of excellence around high technology companies as well as pharma in the Munster region. And externally, that's viewed as something to be aspired to and excellent, and we don't necessarily see it internally. So when you step out of this market and people are kind of looking back at Ireland, they're saying, oh wow, you've got a cluster of amazing activity around the internet in Ireland, so therefore you must all know what you're doing over there. So it's dots that I wouldn't have personally joined, but if they're joining them, go!
Yeah, that's funny because I mean I'm sure that would be almost a surprise to many people because the narrative tends to be so negative locally, that everything to do with the economy is doomed, and we were seemingly looking at years of, as you say, hyper austerity and all this kind of stuff. So, but aside from, let's say, outside looking in, obviously you've worked with businesses that are trading locally, in terms of some of those things. So obviously there's a lot of people in the room here tonight who are essentially trading locally. What, let's say, lessons did you learn from experiences like the electric development and so on that have kind of given you encouragement as to how local businesses can succeed locally?
Well, I think, as you were saying, with the bus scenario that we're experiencing currently, I mean, that's where the entrepreneurs of the future are going to come out of. That's where the opportunities are. So I think there's never been a better time, in some respects, to start a business and to use the web as a scalable model to launch it globally. But yeah, I think, at the end of the day, Aidan, it comes down to getting up at 6:30 in the morning, or 6, sorry, and really kind of being open-minded, being dynamic, being willing to bring people on board that maybe have a different view to you. I think a lot of the psychology and cycle of boom and bust has got to do with fear and anxiety in a way. And I think when people are anxious, they typically don't take risks, and safety kind of is is the norm, and that's where people go. So it's quite challenging, I think, when we are being fed a negative message, for people to actually take a bold step forward and actually do something, and especially put their own money on the table. It's easy to come up with an idea, but it's gut-wrenching when you have to write a check for your own money. And like in a way, a lot of people aren't willing to do that. A lot of people are going the funding route because it's easier and it's safer. But in a way, that's potentially also negative, because people aren't feeling the full fear that you should feel if you're a real entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I think it's I think it's very much about people. It's about people, I think, teaming up with people that have complementary skills and really looking at the space. And as you were saying, almost, I think by traveling, you were able to look back and get a different perspective. And I think sometimes when we're stuck in a place and we don't see the wood for the trees, so we're not really seeing the opportunities. And there are opportunities there. There definitely are. I mean, we were speaking to an entrepreneur yesterday who's looking at bringing bioethanol into Ireland, as a clean burning fuel. You can't buy bioethanol as a fuel. It's an amazing fuel that enables you to create ambient heat. It's fantastic for restaurants, but you can't buy it. So he's seen an opportunity there and is moving very swiftly in that area, and hopes to commercialize it, and is willing to put quite a bit of money into bringing it to market.
Sure. So, one of the things that we've talked about a lot, obviously, tonight already, is this whole area of social media, which we haven't really referred to specifically in the conversation. It might have been implied, but a good friend of ours, Greg Canty, asked this question online last week: is social media a valuable resource or a waste of time? So, based in the context of what we've been discussing here over the last 20 minutes, John, he wets his whistle for this one. He's ready. What would be your take on that question?
Thanks, Greg. I think it's a really difficult question, actually, because social media is just a tool, and it depends on whether you use it to create value or you use it to waste your time.
Yeah.
So it actually depends on the application, which sounds trite, but it's actually true. So I think one of the things that we probably all have realized at this point is that social media is actually a black hole, and it can never be fully fed. So you have to draw a scope around it, and you have to decide on what the commercial objective for your social media strategy is. I think a lot of people have run into difficulties because they had huge optimism about what could be achieved, and they threw themselves wholeheartedly into tweeting or Facebooking or whatever, but they didn't actually set metrics around what they were trying to achieve on a commercial level. So, for me personally, my audience is CEOs and boards who think email is cutting edge technology. So, for me personally, it's not somewhere that I choose to spend my time. And that is a strategy that I have, very clearly focused on, because our business comes from word of mouth, it comes from referral, and there's no sense in which someone is going to buy the type of consultancy I'm offering through a whimsical search of online or SEO. So strangely, for a company that focuses on internet strategy, my internet strategy is not to engage online.
Yeah.
There you go. By the same token, if you've got a B2C offering and there's a conversation about your product, you cannot not engage.
Yeah.
So, well, that's not true. You can. And that can be a strategy, but you've got to have an incredibly powerful brand strategy and self-assurance to be able to do that. I suppose, as was pointed out earlier, there are billions of minutes being consumed on social platforms. So there is an audience, there is a marketplace, and particularly in the travel sector, there's nowhere to hide. So if you're selling something, someone's definitely going to look at TripAdvisor. It's just a given.
Yeah.
So there is nowhere to hide in terms of social interactions, and so you need to man up and actually resource it. It's all about resource. So it's all about defining the scope of that engagement, resourcing it, and looking for a commercial outcome. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does.
That's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah. Maybe there is no actual answer to the question, but Jonathan, what's your take on the
I think
the premise?
It very much depends on the type of business that you are. I think as John highlighted there, I think if you're a consumer-based business, I think it's imperative that you are present, on social media platforms. But as he said as well, they're just platforms. I mean, you have to still create the content, you have to create the story, you have to engage people, you have to draw them nearer, you have to delight them, you have to do all the things that you have to do, to give great customer service in a store. So I think, as you were saying earlier, a lot of people are touting the notion of, the 7 secrets and this whole model of, if I create a blog, they will come. Well, they won't come, unless it's really relevant and interesting. And even that, as we've seen with, Chris Brogan and these guys, it takes, 8 years to kind of reach a relative tipping point. But I think what's more interesting about Greg's blog post, just having read it today, good blog post, Greg, it was just the notion of linking social media into traditional media as well. I think often what happens in social media circles, people that sell social media tend to say that advertising is dead, which it isn't. Because I think television still remains the strongest driver of word-of-mouth communication. I think over 50% of word-of-mouth communication traction is going through television advertising. In particular, in a smaller country like Ireland, if you're on television, it gives you instant credibility and it gets your message out. But what is very interesting is that with us all becoming screen ages these days and watching television and using iPads and smartphones, is that people are actually watching and consuming media, but also using smartphone devices as well. So I think, for example, if you look at the UK, I think during primetime television, that's when 40% of tweets happen during primetime television. Television still drives website activity up to I think 35%. So there's a definite crossover between the two media and how people actually use them. So yeah, I think social media certainly isn't dead. I mean, I think it's definitely transforming the whole media platform. It's transforming marketing. It's very powerful, but it has to be done in the right way.
Yeah.
And I suppose just as a follow-up, I think that's a very good example, and the difficulty is that everyone in this room knows what is appropriate or not appropriate to their business in terms of primetime TV advertising. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's just a tool set. It's just another mechanism of getting your message out. But we all fundamentally understand the cost and reward of primetime TV advertising, but we don't necessarily have a handle on, okay, how does that equate to the fact that, well, using my phone is free. So what's appropriate to your business? I think that's the key that you need to.
I think what's interesting. I think what's interesting as well, Aidan, is that if you look at, I think digital spend by large companies and through big agencies is up to 37%, and I think television spend is 42%. So the gap is closer than it's ever been before. I mean, big companies are realizing that they have to invest in the digital space. And I think I was reading something this afternoon that the average UK smartphone user looks at their phone 150 times a day. I mean, that's like remarkable. So, I've got 2 young kids, and so do you. And if I just look at the usage pattern of, television, no one is sitting down watching TV in the traditional way. The kids are either on Xbox or iPad, and we definitely need your products, Avril, to get the control back. But yeah, I mean, it's a fast-changing landscape, and if you think of, I think there's the number of apps even that are available, and even smaller companies using apps. I think we're all thinking of the interweb or the net as something out there that's kind of like a brochure that we do. It's separate from the company, and then we kind of bolt on our social media icons, and then we've got a social media integrated website,
Mhm.
but you actually have it. So, this is the thing. It's about realizing that the web is totally fluid these days, and brands need to have that fluidity and be able to adapt into the web space by driving conversations, not repeating the same stuff consistently, but actually breaking the rules, doing stuff that's different, grabbing people's attention and bringing them to your website.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense.
Can I just hook into
No.
what you were saying?
Sure.
Because I find that it's becoming really overwhelming to keep track of everything that is out there. And even for companies to try and get a message to me, I have to go through so much information at this stage that the chances are that I missed a message.
Yeah.
And I think, that is something that, with everything that is happening, in terms of social media, the internet and all the information that is being put out there, that, it's almost impossible, I think, to define at this stage how to
Absolutely.
put that message out there and get people to visit the website or indeed buy the product that you're trying to get out there.
Well, you make a great point, Reid. I think if you look at, I think one of our earlier speakers was saying that, internet usage is now 10 hours a day, and I think it's 10 hours a week in Ireland on average, the latest stats. And I think social media usage is 8 hours a day. So as you're saying, there's a massive proliferation of content and clutter that's created. So it's that much more difficult for you to stand out. And once again, especially if you're a solopreneur or a smaller business, you only have a certain amount of time, and you've got all of these different platforms, and you're trying to manage all of this content and absorb all of the stuff that's coming in. But I think with that, I think people are also opting out. I mean, there's sensory overload. I mean, if you think of I think we get hit by about 3,000 advertising messages every day, and I think with social media, that's even ramping up more. So I think in terms of cutting through the clutter and being able to reach your audience, once again, it all depends on what kind of market you're in. In John's market, he needs to target CEOs. So I think a lot of it has got to do with actually understanding who your target market is and being quite ruthless about how you focus on reaching them. Don't get caught up in the hype of social media and because everyone else is doing it, I have to do it. Focus on who your target market is and hit them with a message that's relevant and add value to them in a unique way, and they'll contact you.
What I also find is that a lot of people start looking for things. So in other words, Google and search engines, is really where a lot of the interaction starts. I mean, if I want to buy something, chances are I Google it.
Absolutely.
And that's where I think, if you want to get a message out there, that's where you probably need to start. If it's a consumer item, I mean, obviously, what Frank is trying to sell is, it's not a Googleable item. I mean, I couldn't imagine that a CEO, would go onto Google, to look for internet strategists.
Mm.
Like you say, that's more word of mouth, and probably more kind of driven by you, than actually by somebody who is looking for those kind of services.
Well, I guess the beauty of the search engine and all of that, and in fact all of the online channel, is that the data is there, right? Isn't that what makes it different from traditional forms of content?
I suppose a number of things in that. So one of the other pet projects that I've been working on in the past year has been a project for a local company who want to target a global audience in order to dispose of distressed inventory. And what's fascinating, I suppose, to me is if you stand back from this, and you've been doing it as long as I have, when, in the early days of the internet, it was all about how many cabinets you were going to need and how many racks of servers you were going to need and what resilience you had and would you need a different data store over here, and a bunch of really high capital investments needed to just break ground. Whereas now you can just plug into an outsourced service and scale it by flipping a control panel. And the speed at which you can get a business up and running from scratch, define a brand and be trading is absolutely eye-watering in terms of the velocity. You can buy that audience immediately. The problem is the you got to buy part. So either through blood, sweat and tears or through budget, you have to have the vision to be able to spend the money to make the money. And the problem with the local market in terms of the SME sector is usually they don't have a budget allocated for spending to actually make it work. The thing with online is, I suppose one of the things that we constantly just endlessly struggle with is, yeah, but little Johnny could do that in his bedroom for 2p in a weekend. And it's like, actually, you can't. Can you do it nimbly? Yes, you can. But this is my experience of this outlet brand, is that what's fascinating is that if you've got the vision to actually build a brand, you can grab market share just by spending money on Google AdWords. It's as simple as that. In terms of your, going back to the original question, in terms of your social stuff, in a way your social stuff it's a complex mix because it needs to feed into your SEO, because if it doesn't, the nature of social stuff is that it tends to be incredibly ephemeral. And if you miss it, it's gone. And unless somebody else later repins it or retweets it or re-somethings it, it's actually gone. So it's in and of the moment. And everyone is, overly focused on a viral opportunity. But I can only think of a handful of viral campaigns or hundreds of millions of viral ideas that actually truly went viral. And most of those were engineered up the wazoo with a cast of hundreds. Yeah. So this kind of notion that online is a global marketplace and you can do it close to or for free, in my experience, is a myth. So it's to try and get the balance right around, you probably need to define a brand that is resilient enough to go to market. You probably need some technology / engineering, you need some design, and then you need a marketing budget. Sure. And that's the harsh reality of actually trading online, is that a budget is required. Irrespective of whether it's search engine optimization, search engine marketing, social, it doesn't really matter. Money, unfortunately, is the common currency that flows through the entire interaction. You got to resource it.
Okay, so sorry.
If I just come in there on that.
Actually, if you don't mind, I'm going. Can you hold it for 2 minutes because I just need to wrap up the this bit, and then I'll open up to the floor. And Paul, you're in first. Absolutely. So I have 2 questions before I open it up to the floor and let Paul in again. First question, and actually this is technically bad language. What pisses you off in business?
I'm a very zen person. I never
Yeah, clearly, yeah. The fact you had to think about this makes me feel nervous that there's an onslaught coming, but...
There's a tirade coming, a rant.
Yep.
I think it's actually harps back to my previous point, which is it does get tiring in my line of work that a lot of clients still think that e-commerce is some kind of magic, and that all you've got to do is just add that magic pixie dust and suddenly billions are going to roll in. The truth is, it's just another vehicle, it's just another opportunity to, guess what, work. And what pisses me off is, personally, is people who expect me to magically do the work. I'm not the person who's going to do the work, I'm just going to actually point the way. But the work has to be done by the organization, because it doesn't matter whether it's, again, content for the product or content for search engine optimization or content for social media. If there isn't truth, you're wasting your time. If you're not passionate, if you don't believe in your product enough to actually have some truth around it, it's just marketing. And one of the fascinating things, I suppose, about the velocity of social media is that you will be found out. So if you don't believe enough in your own brand and your own product to actually articulate and resource the articulation of fundamental truths and communications about your product, you're on a hiding to nothing. So,
in other words, deliver.
yeah, well, it's the execution part. People think that part is going to magically happen. If you've got a lovely design, that's only a teeny tiny part of what you need to do. There's a whole execution side, from getting the traffic, to converting the traffic, to shipping the product, to taking the returns, to ensuring that those people who get the product become evangelists for your product, and that you create a virtuous cycle. It's just a complex ecosystem, and you got to work it. So I suppose what pisses me off is just a notion that floats around, which is, yeah, the internet is just a magic money-making machine, and that somehow there is a secret to unplugging and unleashing that value on your business. There isn't. Are there some things that you can stand on the shoulders of others and learn from the mistakes of others? Absolutely. Are there shortcuts? Absolutely. But still, you fundamentally have to A, resource it, and B, work it.
Very good. Well, Mr. Ram, what's your answer to that one?
I think probably my pet peeve is that, good or bad marketing costs exactly the same money, and I see a lot of crap out there. I see a lot of clutter that's just totally unappealing and offensive, but yet companies are spending huge budgets and thinking that they've got fantastic campaigns when they don't really. So I think companies really need to take a close look at the quality points of what they are selling, and make sure that their marketing and branding actually reflects that. Because what I've noticed in Ireland is there's a big disconnect between the strength of a company and the way that they actually communicate themselves. And I think they owe a sense of justice to themselves to get the best message out there.
Very good. The final question before we open it up. The Smarter Egg Way isn't about giving out prescriptions and telling you, Jonathan, where you're going wrong is A, B, and C, and off you go and come back to me next Friday. It's about creating an atmosphere where the right questions emerge, and you identify what the right questions are for you, and trying to find the answers to those questions. So, as you, let's say, survey the room here, a mix of people working for successful large organizations and people who are trying to develop their own businesses, what question do you think people need to be working on finding the answer to? What one question is important?
One.
That's all you got tonight.
Can you sell it?
Can you sell it?
It all comes down to a transaction at the end of the day. It doesn't matter whether you're selling to a VC company or selling to a consumer. There's a fundamental question in any commercial proposition.
Does it solve a human need, a problem? Is it feasible? Can you commercialize it? And is it scalable? Can you grow it? I think those three are pretty crucial questions. I think a lot of entrepreneurs starting out, they kind of think, well, I have this brilliant idea, but does it really solve the problem? And is it doing something totally unique that others are not doing? And is it disruptive? Can you scale it, and can you commercialize it? Those are very important questions that I think all startups need to be able to answer.
Right. Ladies and gents, please show your appreciation for Jonathan and John Prendergast.